Roll. Okay, so this is part 3, Sukkot 2020, dealing with the Mazzaroth. Part 4? Really?
Yeah.
Well, maybe I missed part 3.
It was late.
Anyway, so in discussing, like Ira was saying the other day, left things as kind of a cliffhanger. And there's a whole lot of information in this particular book by Francis Rolleston. And I can tell you what's in the book. That would burn a lot of time, and you could just get the book. There's E.W. Bullinger's book is pretty good. But just to refresh what I was saying, E.W. Bullinger's book, which is called either The Gospel in the Stars or The Message in the Stars. No, I think it was The Gospel in the Stars. Anyway, it's basically correlating every constellation, and each constellation's 3 deacons, so there's 12 plus 3 times 12, which would be a total of 48 constellations. Every one of them is disclosing or revealing or discussing some aspect that Jesus is the Christ. Christian perspective. And he conflicts with Satan for the sake of delivering the church. So Rolleston's whole book is that theme, as is E.W. Bullinger's. Now, I'm not trying to say they're wrong, but as I tried to say the other day, depending on the spectacles that you're using, you're going to see that. So if you're into some sort of occult mysticism, or if you're into New Age, or if you're born in India and you're a Hindu, because the constellations are in India, they're also in China, they're also in Babylon and Egypt, you're going to see your reference of your culture around you. What I'm trying to bring out here is the perspective, the Ayin Dal and Ayin Tav, which I erased from here. I'm using that as the reason I keep coming back to this. It's in Daniel 12:4 until the time, but this is a pair of eyeglasses by which to see things. And the see things is comprehend that Yeshua claimed to be the door, and it's joined with, yoked to, understanding the meanings of the letters. So the letters themselves find their interpretation by the fact that Yeshua is the Messiah. And what does it mean that Yeshua is the Messiah? He's identified by the meaning of the 22 letters. So this works as a catch-22. A catch-22 is a book written, and they happen to use the word 22, which coincidentally, which they had no intention of, there's 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. It's one of those things. What this means is, you can't have this unless you have this, but you can't have this unless you have this. So the catch-22 is either you have both immediately, or you've got neither, because one can't sustain without the other. People who investigate at the micro level, you might say the composition of the human body, looking at the eyeball, says it could not have evolved. Even a single cell with the mitochondria and the way that it works with bringing in nutrients through the cell wall and the little motor in the furnace and turning it into energy, it can't have evolved. It happened all at once, which speaks of creation. It can't have developed to become the physiological body part with moving systems. Couldn't happen. And they say that the people who study the way things are built in the universe, who think that evolution is you might say the status of how things happened, is like saying a tornado hits a junkyard of automobiles, whips everything up into the air, and produces a 747 flying with the engines running and all the hydraulics and everything else working. And it's like, out of this you get that, and it's functioning, and nobody designed it? How does that work? Well, the impossible is what they're trying to say. If you look at the systems that we have, they all fit together like a puzzle but they had to happen at the same time. So what I'm saying is that the mystery of this ayin, dalet, ayin, tav, which is simply translated until time, and then the English word va, if it was the time, there should have been a letter hey. That fifth letter means literally the, and it's put in front of other words, but it's not there in Hebrew. Just for what it's worth, there is a word in Hebrew which means yoke, or connected to in reference to, for or against, and it's ayin lamed, and that could be there. I don't think that the hyphens were there in the ancient Paleo, but it's certainly there in the modern Hebrew. Why? Who put them there? Was it Mazzaroth scribes in the Middle Ages? I don't know, but it's in the text, so some words which are hyphenated, I go ahead and put them there. And before I had any understanding of the Hebrew language, didn't understand a single word, didn't even recognize the letters, a friend bought me the Tanakh here, and just opened it up, and happened to be Daniel 12, and boom, that word just jumped out at me and grabbed my eyes because of the symmetry, because of these two letters. Of course, it was written in modern Hebrew, so in the text it looks like ayin, dalet, ayin, tav, kind of similar, but for some reason it just grabbed my attention. And now I keep referencing this word as a secret code, a key by which to say, if you're a Jew and you have no regard of Yeshua, saying that he's the door, you're never going to see that. If you're a Christian, have no regard of the meaning of the Hebrew alphabet or the fact that they're correlated to the Moedim, because all that's been nailed to the cross and done away with. It's only until the time that we have both eyes of vision, binocular, where you see this three-dimensional, because they both have to focus on the Dalet Tav, which is right, pious, orthodox, which is to say correct, legal, actual. So, and I'm using that as an example of the mystery wrapped up in the spelling of the words. So, as Ira was saying, I didn't get into the detailed spelling of those words, and this whole study is about the spelling of the words. And that would take quite a few more hours. So hopefully I'll get to that next week at the other location and make a video and be part 5. But I'm going to pick up and carry along with this. Now, I don't want to just leave you guys without the answers that you need if there's some loose ends. So feel free to raise your hand and ask a question, or if you want me to address some part of it in the middle of speaking, if you want to do that. And I'll hopefully bring everybody's understanding to at least it's manageable. Okay, if it doesn't even answer it, at least if it's manageable, it'll give you a basis from which you can feel comfortable enough about pursuing the study. Like I was saying the other day, this is the, you might say, the domain of occultists, New Age people, witchcraft, astrology, worshiping the heavens. And so from the Christian perspective, every bit of this is taboo, worthless, meaningless, having nothing to do with anything. But the point of what Rolleston found is that in his research, late 1800s or mid-1800s, he investigated the religion, the philosophy, the sciences of ancient Babylon, Media Persia, Egypt, Greece, Rome, India, China, the British, the Celts, and all of them are based on this. And as a matter of fact, there's a statement in here that he says every single world religion is founded on those 12 signs, though you wouldn't recognize it. But that would include Christianity. But Christianity abhors these things because they look occultic. But he's saying it's gotten scrambled, it's gotten mixed up. The word Mazzaroth, which means, translated constellations, Mazzaroth, the word Mazar means to spin. Well, the zodiac spins around the earth, or the earth spins under it, but they've also got spun out, like a tornado, whipping up the information and producing some other thing other than what it started with, like the junkyard of cars and flying airplanes. So We can't look at any of this at face value. Perhaps I'm even saying something which isn't perfectly accurate. So the burden isn't on me. I'm trying to be as accurate as I possibly can. The burden's on you to protect your own mind and protect your own soul from being corrupted. So I'm just saying this is dangerous information, which is why a lot of people won't even mention it. You know, you flip through the newspaper, there's the horoscope, don't even look, not even curious. Don't want to be creepy things crawl into your eyes. I mean, literally, that's the feeling, you know. Anyway.
Question.
Yes.
Where are things at as far as having the scriptures, you know, in Paleo-Hebrew or parallel, you know, or anything like that?
They're on the internet. You can see the entire Bible. You can download the entire Bible from Genesis to Revelation written in Paleo-Hebrew. That's on my website.
Have English side to side, like my English, the Hebrew, English?
No, here, let me explain. So my website is Eric, E-R-I-K, Tology, T-O-L-O-G-Y, .net. Okay, that's the website. So on the website, if you go there, I think it's under writings. Do you remember, Ron? Is it under writings, or where is the Ericology workbook? And well, anyway, you'll have to go there and find it. Resources. Okay, 3 bars. Hit that. Resources. Punch that. And so there's a James Ralph, a friend up in Canada, took, I believe, the online internet file from Stone's Tanakh, I think, and just took the modern Hebrew letters and had them put into the Paleo letter style, which is the Ericology letter font, and then printed that out. Well, that's the Old Testament. But then he found, and I keep forgetting which exact file he got, but I think it was from the 1800s also, the New Testament written in Hebrew. So it's not the original Hebrew, but it's somebody's back translation, taking modern, either English, Greek, Latin, whatever it was, back in the 1800s, and they back translated, reverse translated it into the Hebrew. That's my understanding of what it is. And then we took that and turned it into the Paleo. And so that's what's on the New Testament half. So there's 2 formats. One is like what you'd find in any book, the lines close together, written in black ink, so you can just read it if you know how to read it. But then the workbook version, the lines are about 1.5 inches apart, written in red letters, so it's going to be expensive to print because that's colored pages, right? And sometimes they're $2 a page. So we did the black version so it'd be easier, cheaper, less pages. 1.5 inches apart, those workbooks, so if you print it out, you can print out as many copies as you want, the whole thing or whatever, but then you can fill in the blanks, like what I do here, writing definitions underneath it. So that's why it's called the workbook, and it's in the 4 colors, blue, purple, red, and gold, playing into the embroidery colors that were on the Mishkan. But print off whatever you want and use that. But that's the only resource that I know, other than some Karaites printed something, computer-generated images that were crowded together, and you can't even decipher what you're looking at. And that was back 20 years ago, so 15 years ago. So they said, okay, here's the Paleo-Hebrew, and it's like, but I can't read it. It's a bad production. It's the letters are, and it's like, what good is it? Plus, if you don't recognize the letters because they're kind of awkwardly. So just so you know, when I compiled this font, it's written in the blue, the letters that I use here, you can't find one artifact with all those letter shapes. But what I did is I looked through encyclopedias and pictures of artifacts, and I looked at every possible form that I could find, and I contemplated the meanings of the letters, the pictographic value, and I extracted from various different groups of alphabetic fonts that you find written on stone or terracotta or some whatever, and I compiled those 22. Somebody told me they found a picture of some artifact that had almost every one of them in one package, maybe short 1 or 2. The Zion, for example, was typically drawn like this. It's like, the letter Zion means to cut off, like the Sabbath day being cut off. Does that make you think cut off? Well, the line is cut off on both ends, but what is that? Just for the sake of being on camera, the old shape of the letter Zion was that. But this is drawn like a hatchet or an axe. The modern is like that. This is a legitimate form, but the other way it was drawn is that, which is a plowshare. If you had this apparatus like a wheelbarrow, but instead of a wheel it had two spikes, an ancient plow, you'd pick up these two handles, and if you pulled it that direction, it would drag two furrows in the line. Well, that spikes in the ground became a disc plow over time, which became our letter G. And that's the A, B, C, D, E, F, G. That's our letter Zion. That's the correlation. So I draw it as an axe, not as a disc plow, but it means that which cuts open. So Yeshua was put to the Roman scourge, being adorned with weapons, which is what that letter Zion also means. Like Xena, the warrior princess, her ornamentation is weaponry. Swords, throwing stars, whatever it might be. So the Romans, with Pontius Pilate, adorned, bejeweled Yeshua with weaponry. Crown of thorns, scourge on his back, ripping open his flesh like a plowshare. It's all in the story. The pictures are built in, but I had to decide what's the best picture, the simplest, without even explanation, that if somebody contemplated, they'd see it in the picture, the graphic shape of the letter would speak for itself if I wasn't even there to give my interpretation. That's why I chose those particular letters. And Daniel 12, hiding the letters, putting them into flames, were such that you could look at those and they're meaningless. I mean, this letter Mem, like the undertow and the crashing of a wave, means water. It's this turbulent water. It's not smooth water. That doesn't look like water. Neither does that. Daniel's told to hide the words of the book, and I believe he did it by changing the style of the letters. So, anyway, I could elaborate each one, but that's why they are what they are. And each one of them, I didn't make up those shapes, but I pulled them from this set or that set and compiled that set. Just so you know. Yes, you got to...
Was that, is Jeff Benner uses one of the words, is Ian, I think that's what it is?
Okay, so Jeff Benner, the letter Ian, some people say, well, there was another letter that most people write it Ian, in which I used to write it that way. And then it's like, that letter is in the sequence order of our letter O. But Ian, O, each letter, like in English, if you learn phonics, A starts with A, B, B, the consonant B, that's the letter B, the consonant S or K, that's C, D, D. So the name of the letter is the consonant value. If you get to I, and that sounds like A, but it's the equivalent of our O. Why would you have an O letter in place pronounced with something that's not its consonant value? Well, because the real way to pronounce that letter is a back throat guttural, which is from back there. Het is up front, cough is somewhere in between, but they write it as Ghayan, G-H-A-Y-I-N. Well, because it's really the O, even though you don't call it an Oyen, like Oy Bay, you don't call it Oyen, but I've started writing it Ian with an O, just so that people can, in their mind, though it's phonetically coarse or disparate or not, but it retains the position in the sequence. Now, the letter Ian that they call the Ghayan, they say is a knot shape. And it's like, why is it a knot shape? Nobody knows. Why is it an eyeball or a fish hook nobody knows. So nobody knows anyway. So according to the world-class scholars of the Semitic language alphabet since antiquity, it's all guesswork. It really is. If you look at the encyclopedias, it'll prove that out. Well, anyway, that's another part of the story. point to different books, but the point is, because it's all guesswork, for me to correlate the meanings of the letters to the Moedim, Passover, unleavened bread, Shavuot, Yom Teruah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Shemini Atzeret, I've not heard of any other scholars ever do that. This is a little bit innovative. Does anybody else know this? I don't know. I don't know anybody, but maybe there is. I don't know. The point is, how can I prove that those are correlated to the Moedim? The theme of each letter, the drawing of each letter, which pulls us to the ayin. What is ayin? Lines up with Yom Kippur, which is Day of Atonement. Now, it just so happens that you might say Day of Atonement is, there's an altar, and you put a sacrifice on it, and you burn it up. It goes up into smoke, right? The Day of Atonement sacrifice. And because of that sacrifice, your sins are remitted once a year for the nation, besides your personal repentance mechanisms as you become aware of your sins and you bring another sacrifice to the front of the door. This is inside the Mishkan that the priest offered this. Okay, so that means if there's scales of balance, which I draw typically as just a little graphic, minimal kind of graphic with scales of balance, if you have a sin, you have to weigh with equal measure. So Yahweh gave through his people that for all the corruption we do, if you offer this sacrifice, it'll balance the scale. So a set of balanced scales would be the symbol of the theme of Yom Kippur. And if we don't do what he says, and have an unacceptable, inappropriate sacrifice, you're still guilty. The scales haven't tipped to balance. So you could say the meaning of the letter ayin, which is balance exactly, weigh carefully, look, consider. It's like, boy, you better know what's going on and give the appropriate measure. Well, so the benefit of believing that Yeshua is the Messiah, that was the atoning sacrifice, wait a minute, that was for Passover. Passover lamb that takes away the sins of the world. Only the Passover lamb was not a sin sacrifice. So now what do? Big problem. Any one of these little rabbit trails we could talk about for an hour, but I'm just trying to bring something to bear. That some of these systems you look at as not just a linear order, a sequential, a step-by-step, but it's a big pool, like a stew, where they're all happening at once. And that's part of what I'm going to suggest is going on with these constellations. It's not necessarily start here and go through this order, or start here at the Virgo and go through this order. So that's the way they're laid out. It might be this big stew of consideration with all these things kind of bumping into each other and percolating. And that way, like with the numerous definitions of a single letter or a single word, it's like, which one is the primary meaning? It's like, oh, back up. That's what you do when you're making a translation. You pick the one meaning, or you look in the concordance and you pick the best one or the most suitable one, and then you fit the sentence to that meaning of that word. Or you fit the word to the meaning of the sentence of what's going on in the verse and the paragraph, and therefore you get construed, built translations, but they're not necessarily accurate. And what I'm trying to do is say if there's 5 different meanings of a letter or a word, take them all into consideration. And try to amalgamate or weave like a tapestry or a poetry, a string of pearls. How do you not just look at each pearl, but appreciate the string of pearls? Not just each note, but turn the notes into a song. Or like a poem where it's a phrase, but each word is kind of a picture, but then you have a certain meter and you have a certain rhythm and you have a certain this connected to this, connected to this, and a recurring motion, and then you step back and you can appreciate the whole thing. And sometimes poems have a turnaround at the end where this is a specific reference to that, kind of like Aleph connected to Tav, and then Tav connects back up to Aleph. All these are things that I found woven into the Hebrew writings. So if you turn it into Greek or turn it into English, it's all lost. It's missing. And all they're trying to do is save the narration, the story value. talking to Stan Tenen, Miru group. He doesn't even believe this stuff. But astrophysicists spent 30 years studying Genesis 1:1. Not that it means in the beginning God created the heaven and earth, but he's just looking at the value of the letters in this order. Bet, Resh, Aleph, Shin, Yod, Tav, Bet, Resh. 27 letters. He spent 30 years just studying the letter sequence and come up with incredible insights. Geometric metaphor of consciousness is what's embedded. And I think, what does that even mean? Man, it's just fantastic. But he doesn't recognize, last I heard, last he said, which was years ago, he might be different now, but he doesn't recognize that Yahweh is the creator of the heavens and the earth, or that Yeshua is the Messiah. I mean, or that the Torah is the laws that we should obey. I mean, so it's like, there's a lot of ways to see different things, but how do you find the value? But he said, what if these Hebrew words are like suitcases? And if you go on a vacation and you get bumper stickers from different places you go and you plaster them all over the suitcase, and then the suitcase becomes the sacred suitcase with memorabilia of where you've been throughout the centuries, and you go, wow, nobody messed with the suitcase. And you set the suitcase in the museum and you remember the travels, and it elicits all these great stories of, you know, your family history, and somebody walks up and says, hey, what's in the suitcase? What do you mean, what's in the suitcase? That's what a suitcase is for. These words are suitcases. What's in them? And so what he did is open the suitcase and find out that the spelling of the words in a certain order tied to hand gestures, which is tied to consciousness, which is tied to the same physiological place in the brain as the mouth and the eye and the hand. And so if you hold your hands in certain gestures, which is why Italians speak with their hands. It's a joke. But anyway. That if you hold your hands in certain shapes, in your mind's eye, actually, if you hold them in a certain place, you'll see the spelling of the modern Hebrew letters in this certain pattern, which is keyed to a geometrical, you might say, extrapolation of the sequence of the 27 letters. So if you plot the numerical value of each letter on an XYZ coordinate, it'll be a point in this Cartesian graph, and it forms this shape which fits into your hand. And if you hold your hand in a certain shape and like he calls it, dance of the Hebrew letters, you can see each letter that spells the word, and it's like, is that the way this thing is built? And that's in the modern, not in the paleo, and it just goes on and on. The more you look into the language, it's just so deep and vast and incredible and mind-blowing. But we're just bringing it back and saying, yeah, but how do you read it? And to correlate it to these constellations, the same thing has happened. It's got completely spun out, and so it's pushed aside. But to say, as we said the other day, these 12 constellations are, according to Willison's study, exactly tied to the 12 tribes of Israel. And if Abraham is the guy that separate this, and Abraham tied together the story in the 12 constellations, that Yahweh said, okay, Abraham, with regards to what you do, suffering, narrating the story, I will see to it, I'm paraphrasing what Yahweh said in Genesis 15, I will see to it that your family history, the story of your family, plays out according to that narrative. So why would Abraham, who wanted a family more than anything, because he had nobody at the time, before Ishmael or Isaac was born, or any of the 6 other children from Keturah, that why would he say, oh, my family is going to be successful and then come to ruin? Why would you do that to your family if you're always going to say, okay, I'll make it so. My family will come to greatness, go stupid, get lost into pagan idolatry, disintegrate, but then they will find the truth once again, recover, and come back to even a greater greatness than they were previously. That's the family story. Well, where does it end? Up there at success. So that same story I find written in the Hebrew alphabet. And in Yeshua's narrative, where he resurrects from the grave unto preeminence at the Kufresh Shin area. It's the same story. So then why, from the Christian eschatology, do they say, to go back to Nebuchadnezzar's dream, the statue in Daniel 2, this head of gold, arms of silver, midsection bronze, legs of iron, feet of iron mixed with clay, ruling the world till the end of the world. Till the stone comes from out of nowhere, carved from a mountain without human hands, so it can be read differently, hits the feet, and the feet, statue crumbles, the stone becomes mountain, fills the earth, fills the universe, won't yield its sovereignty to another. Oh, that's the Messianic kingdom. That's the new kingdom. Jesus said, my kingdom's not of this world. Okay, so if this is Jesus coming back, then the bad guys get to rule till the end of the world, and then when he shows up, it's the end of the world, so he establishes his new kingdom in the by and by forever. If you believe that model, that's your expectation. We get stomped down by the beast system, the world's governments, empires, until he comes back and rescues us and starts everything new. But that's not what it says that I see. In other words, there certainly is these 5 empires, but there's this stone. What if it's not Jesus coming back? What if that stone means something different? In which case, if it hits the feet, disintegrates them, crumbles, the statue falls, turns the dust, disappears, and then the stone turns into a mountain that fills the earth, will not yield its sovereignty to another, then it's the last empire on the face of the earth. Where's Yeshua? He hasn't come back yet. He comes back afterwards. Perhaps the bride preparing herself is that stone. The word regal, which is feet and leg, literally means custom, habit, and tradition. The way you walk out, the regalia, regulated by the civil government to establish a culture in a consciousness of uniformity, like Christmas, Easter Sunday, Halloween, that kind of thing. So if the stone is the Betula Israel, the virgin daughter of Yahweh, of Zion, the word Zion means do what he said, essentially. We could talk about that, but the word Zion means the one who's doing Yahweh's command. Well, he said, keep the Moedim and the Sabbath day. Learn his ways. The Torah, which the Christians said, no, it's done away with. We're not going to do that. We're going to get pagan religion, pagan holidays, blend them with Christianity and say, this is what you do. Christmas, Easter, Halloween, Sunday. Sorry, that's not the Torah. Yahweh said, do not do that. And the Christians said, we're doing that, and you're going to take it as worship, by golly. I've heard songs, this is your worship. What is your worship? Sunday, Christmas, Easter. I'm not trying to berate or criticize, though it is a berated criticism. I'm saying this is about the virgin daughter of Israel waking up to return to Yahweh's instructions and just do what he said. And that is the heart of Yeshua, who says, I'm not about my own agenda. I'm only doing what I see the Father doing, saying what I hear the Father saying. So the word stone, which is spelled Aleph Bet Nun, prefix letter Aleph means I will. Bet is to materialize or incorporate into a substance of being. Nun is to put into action. Aleph Bet is the word Father. Bet Nun is the word Son. Aleph Bet Hey means desire or to have a passion about something. And then so the Nun suffix means to put that desire into practice. And for the Father to say when Yeshua is getting baptized, mikvah, this is my beloved Son in whom I'm well pleased, listen to him. He's admitting, the Father's admitting, that Yeshua is a very good model of Eben. And Yeshua said, follow me. Do what I do. I'll show you the way to do it successfully. So for the virgin daughter of Israel, daughter of Zion, daughter of Yah, Bat is daughter, but Bat is also one deserving of, like a village under the protection of a city. All these things are in the Hebrew words. For us to turn back as a good ben, which is the word son, so he blends wife, son, daughter, servant. The Hebrew blends all these things together in our reference to Elohim, our Father. For us to engage the action, being the essence of his desire and doing what he said, is the word stone. And if that's the stone that impacts the culture of the holidays and the customs of this amalgamation of Babylon, Media, Persia, Greece, and Rome, in the days of democracy, 10 toes of iron mixed with clay, which could be democracy because it's not an empire, it's an extension of the Roman Empire, like the two legs of politics and religion, the eastern and western halves of the Roman Empire, midsection Greece, Media Persia, the silver, arms, which is military and economics, and the intelligentsia of academia, the head of Babylon. If that hits that, which is what we're doing by keeping Sukkot and keeping the Yom HaShabbat today, that's what topples the statue. And instead of saying, well, it's carved not by human hands, the other way to read that is the stone has its effect not by human armed conflict. It's not a fight. It's not shooting bullets and missiles. It's an ideological reform of returning to the Torah. That's what topples the statue. And then that stone turns into a mountain that fills the earth. And all the vestiges of that amalgamated empirical system that had dominated the earth since the days of Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon disappears to dust and is never even remembered or seen before. And then that the bride has made herself ready, then Yeshua shows up. Then it's the end of the world. That's a whole different eschatology. That's a whole different hope set before us. And remember what happened with the 12 spies going into the land. They all saw the giants. They all saw the giant walls. They all saw the huge, fierce weaponry and heard the voices of the intent to smash Israel. And 10 spies said, we're done for. There's no way. This is beyond anything that even Yahweh can do. And Joshua and Caleb. Their names, Joshua. Yahweh saves. Yahweh is the capacity to deliver us unto victory. And Caleb, all heart. The word kana, Yahweh calls himself El Kona. Kona meaning zealous, jealous, fanatical over his stuff. He's fanatical about his Moedim, fanatical about his system, fanatical about his words and his creation and his passion for Israel being, I'm going to be your Elohim and you're going to be my people. It's this fantasy, I have a dream. In this verse, like I said, the word shavar, Israel broke his dreams, crushed his dreams. But it's not over. We are in the generation, the capacity, the time to restore Yahweh's dreams. To bring life back to those dreams as certainly as Yeshua came back from the dead, as certainly as he promised to restore Israel back to beyond its previous splendor, even in the days of David and Solomon. That's what's in front of us. So the voices that say this is the end of the world, the tribulation, the Antichrist, the rapture, the beast, the man of sin, the 666, that's just Goliath pounding his chest and threatening the armies of Israel, and only David walked up. And David, the word David, Dalet Vav Dalet, means beloved. Only in the capacity of beloved of Yahweh, trusting his word to be true, and then you're stepping forward in that confidence. Can anything turn around? Yeshua confidently said, this is the plan. I'm submitting myself to human death, being entombed 3 days and 3 nights later, because he knew that the program built into the entire system of creation was that he's going to sprout back to life, the new life coming out of the depth of the mem disintegration, sprouting out from the root source within the tomb here until it manifested on the face of the earth here. And Pezod, he pays an open mouth. The words that he spoke, so the words blossoming and coming back, is the action bringing us to this point. So now, if we can read the pattern in the Mazzaroth, correlating to that pattern, it's a second voice of witness that this is true. But I can show you all kinds of verses in this scripture where it says it's true. More and more voices of affirmation. But why then is nobody talking about it? Why was there 10 spies who convinced 3 million people to stone to death Joshua and Caleb until Yahweh waited until it was progressing to the point where they were actually gathering the stones and putting the guys in chains, and he said, stop! That's it! You're all going into the desert to die for the next 40 years, except Joshua and Caleb. And he pulled them through the 40 years and said, because you believed me, you get to enter the promised land. Even Moshe and Aaron couldn't enter. Our attitude is our choice, and we can be Joshua and Caleb. The 40 years in the desert was not mandatory. They could have gone in then. It was all prepared, but because of their voice of disbelief and rebellion, they changed the reality of the face of the earth. Meaning, not only did they have to go back into the wilderness for 40 years, and all their children then died and let their children come back, but there's 40 years of Canaanites that should never have been born. Think about that. Yahweh didn't even intend for those 40 years of Canaanites, Philistines, Neanderthals to ever see the spark of day. And he intended for his people to go in there and have even more children, but they're going to die in the wilderness, and so the whole genealogical history of mankind changed because of their attitude of thinking Yahweh just took us out here to die. There wasn't enough graves in Egypt. That's right. He brought us out here to die. He's going to starve us to death. That's what he's like. That's his character and nature. And Yahweh said, don't keep saying that, or you're going to have exactly what you say. And they kept saying and said, okay, I'm going to bring you out here and kill you in the desert, just like you said. And I found verses where Yahweh says, what we believe of him is who he will be for us. Now think about that. If you think, the guy's kind of a dirty rat. Okay, then in your life, he will be the big dirty rat, and you'll see it and validate it. But if you think, I hope that he saves me through the tribulation, okay, he'll save you and you'll have tribulation. But what if you say, I'm not going to imagine a fantasy that Yahweh will be my champion and defender and save me and set me on high. His words say so. It's not my fantasy imagination. He said so. So I'm just reading his words and choosing to believe it and say, that's what I will hold on to with all my strength. And believe it and project it and expect it with anticipation as if it was the only alternative of reality. On track. And these are all verbs that I extract from Hebrew words that I'm trying to pantomime for you. And he says, you expect that? Okay, then that's what it'll be for you. Really? I can determine the reality by my intent and attitude, like sending out, as it were, these vibrations of reality that everything else then in the environment capitulates to affirm, to manifest. Wow, we didn't learn that in Christianity. I didn't. Almost sounds New Agey. I'm going to address this verse here. So this is Isaiah 44:25. So if you look in the context, back up to verse 21. And I'll just read out of Stone Snock here. And then we'll look at what it says. We got 15 minutes. Remember these things, Jacob and Israel. Remember these things. That's the word zakar. Remember the word remember, Zayin Kaf Resh. Commemorate, memorialize. Yahweh, Yod He Vav He, is the memorial name. The masculine, because zakar also means masculine. That word zakar means masculine. It means to prick or to pierce, and like a thorn, grab a hold. You're walking through the brush and they grab a hold of your sock. Yahweh is this name that he set to stick in your brain and bring back these things to recollection. That's what Yod He Vav He does. So when Ptolemy II had the Septuagint translated, written into Greek, Yod He Vav He was extracted. 2,300 years ago, as of 2015, approximately 285 BC. Yahweh, the memorial name, the masculine stick in your brain, plant the seed of life, was yanked out of the scripture in 285 BC. And it hasn't been brought back since our days. Imagine that. The whole time I was a kid, never heard Yod He Vav He, never heard Yahweh, Jehovah occasionally mentioned, but it's been ripped off. Remember. So is this, oh yeah, remember that? This remember is this command where Yahweh is saying, and if I tell you to remember, at such a time you will remember, and then all the effect of remembering will make it happen, such as that seed planted in your brain will spark to life and cause everything else then to manifest because of the potent vitality that's in that seed. Zakar, masculine seed planting tool, plants the name Yod He Vav He, and that name carrying his DNA, which is evidenced by his Moedim, sprouts into the life, the re-emergence of the kingdom. Remember when Yeshua rose from the dead? Hey, is it now you're going to restore the kingdom to Israel? It's not for you to know the times. It might be a different way to translate that, but I believe these are the times of the restoration of the kingdom, because it has to come through his name being the seed planted as the Shem Zakar to bring back recognition of all these matters. Okay, that's just the first word. Remember these things, Jacob and Israel, for you are my servant. That word servant is obed, as in obedience, as in Obadiah, which means we're supposed to do what he said. I fashioned you to be my servant, Israel. Do not forget me. If we forget Yahweh's Sabbath day, Moedim, language, name, culture, we've forgotten him. We're not his servant, and anything else can't happen. He's saying, you got to remember me. So for us to sit down on Shabbat as a remembrance, the day of Zakar, the day of remembering that he created the heavens and the earth and rested on the seventh day, it all goes back in the whole dictionary. Once you see this pattern, all these things, this is like a big jigsaw puzzle, multi-dimensional jigsaw puzzle, and the more you start looking, it all fits together. It's really amazing, like a holographic. Anyway, out of all the people groups in the face of the earth, Yahweh fashioned Israel to keep this culture, the Moedim, the Sabbath day, walked out these regal, these regalia of the year, because they testify, Ed of Moedim, witness and testimony, they testify of him as a servant, as one who is in the employ. So Yahweh said, part of the covenant is, I'll take care of you, I'll cover your expenses, and I will champion your cause and protect you and defend you if and as long as you walk in my ways. And if you don't walk in my ways, what you do is you create a vacuum, a void, and all the negative stuff of your enemies comes sucked into you. The interesting thing, as I was doing this other study, it seems like it goes back to the physics of electromagnetism. When we do Yahweh's stuff, then the otherworldly, invisible of Yahweh's stuff comes rushing in. So talking about that with Elisha in 2 Kings 6, where we're surrounded by the enemy, we're overwhelmed, outnumbered, and Elisha said, hey, open my eyes, open the eyes of my servant, that he can see what's really going on. Suddenly he saw the hills were swarming with flaming horses and chariots. It's like, wow, there's quite a few more of us than there is of them. Don't even be afraid. But the other way to translate that is the stuff that we are believing in by Aleph Tav, this stuff, is way more significant, outweighing in the scales of balance anything they have of their symbolism, of their regard, which is the eye and the pyramid or the skull and crossbones or whatever other gizmos they might come up with. Why did those flaming angels in chariots show up? Because of Elisha's structure of belief. Don't fear. 365 times, don't fear. That's how many times it's in the Bible for us to regard that commandment. So if I can keep my mind on track, trusting him, everything he said will happen. There's other verses that say the same thing. We're down to a couple of minutes. Let me finish reading this. Verse 22, I will have, see that's the letter Tav, it can mean I will, projecting the future. So it's either past or future, nobody seems to be able to figure it out. I will have wiped away your willful sins. Why? Because of the Day of Atonement? Because of Yeshua dying on the cross? Like a thick mist, and your transgressions like a cloud. You got this thick, heavy fog, the sun comes up, and sometimes within minutes, it's gone. A few minutes ago I couldn't see, and now it's clear as day. It's like he's using it as a metaphor. Return to me. That's the word shuv, or teshuvah. Return to me, for I will have redeemed you. Or another way to read this, return to me, and I will redeem. In other words, we were reading in Jeremiah 33, where Ephraim comes to his senses and goes, gosh, bring me back, would you? Prodigal son story. As soon as Ephraim turns, Yahweh brings him back, the prodigal son. This stuff is instantaneous. Sing, glad song, O heavens, for Yahweh has done wonders. That word wonders is paleo. Shout for joy, O foundations of the earth. Break out with glad song, O mountains, O forest, and all its trees, for Yahweh has redeemed Jacob, and he will glorify himself through Israel. If Israel walks in Yahweh's ways, Yahweh is glorified in Israel as the one and only nation. If Israel doesn't do Yahweh's ways, then Yahweh will be glorified in Israel by the beatings, the punishment, the curses, Leviticus 26, Deuteronomy 28, the calling in of his enemies, the destruction of the land, because that's the terms of the covenant. You do what I say, you get enormous blessings. You don't do what I say, you get enormous beatings. That's the terms of the covenant. And all our forefathers said, yes, we sign up for that. Thank you very much. And so we are a participant. It wasn't nailed to the cross. That covenant was not nailed to the cross. But the Christians say it is, so that we have forsaken it, so that we perpetuate the curse. Gets into this whole other thing, world history. Verse 24. Thus says Yahweh, your Redeemer, the one who formed you from the womb. I am Yahweh who made everything, who spread out the heavens by myself and formed the earth of my own accord. Hey, spread out the heavens, putting the stars in the sky where they belong. This is now sucking us back into, what does he mean by this? Verse 25, which is right here, which we're going to just about out of time. We'll talk about that at the beginning of the next session. Who, now this is saying, I am Yahweh, I am the one who abrogates, listen to this translation, abrogates the omens of the stargazers. In other words, if you stare at these constellations and try to make sense out of them and to tell the future, Yahweh is saying, whatever they come up with, I'm going to scramble it. I'm going to prove them wrong. I'm going to make them feel like idiots, like the weather report. It's going to rain. No, it doesn't. Well, it'll rain this much. It'll rain that. It's like they keep being wrong. That's what he's going to do, and he thinks it's a big joke. That's his sense of humor of what he's going to do to the guys that looked at the constellations in order to figure things out. We've got to look to his word. But see, there's another way to read these things, which is what I'm talking about. So he says, who abrogates the omens of the stargazers and makes fools of the astrologers, who makes wise men retreat and makes their thoughts foolish. Now that's verse 25, which we're going to look at in a second. But here I'll finish reading this paragraph. I am Yahweh who confirms the words of his servant, that's the Torah, that's the Hebrew language, that's the Messiah, and fulfills the counsel of his messengers. Who are the messengers? Prophets, teachers, angels. Who also says of Jerusalem, it shall be settled, and all the cities of Judah, they shall be built up, and I will rebuild its ruins. Has that happened yet? Well, kind of, sort of, but not the way this describes, so that's yet the future in front of us. So, again, you read this and you realize there's a future in front of us. We're not at the end. We're back from the end after coming out of the crypt. Like Yeshua, I see him all in front of us, is Yeshua walking around for 40 days and they can't touch him because he disappears and goes from here to there through the walls. They shall, who says to the depths, dry up, and I will dry out your rivers, who says of Cyrus, he is my shepherd, he will fulfill all my desires, who says of Jerusalem, it shall be built, and of the temple it will be established. Oh, Trump's supposed to be the second Cyrus. It's like, well, it's coming off of that, because chapter 45, thus says Yahweh to his anointed one, to Cyrus. So the people who believe that Trump has anything to do with Cyrus are invoking the end of Isaiah 44, 45. I'm not going to go into that, but the point is, even they think this is where we are. So it can't be the end of the world, even from that reckoning. Okay, so I'm going to go into this. I'll just say it. Here's Mapar, Etot, Badim, Ve Kasemim, E Hulal, Mashiv, Chak Mim, Achor, Ve Da'atem, Ishakal. 2 minutes. This word shakal, the last word, remember that basketball player, Shaquille O'Neal? Arabic name, that's the word, shakal, which means wise, clever. Chakma, wisdom. Shiv, old man, or one who returns, repents, or rebels. Prodigal son. We'll get into this in just a minute, because we've got to close it up. So go ahead and take a break for 5 minutes or something.